Hey, what's up, Grinders? Dan Gaspar here with TJ Zwarych. We are here for FanDuel Friday talking baseball today, Friday's baseball slate. And it's a big one. We got 14 games, one of the bigger slates we've seen in a while. So we'll get to that in a second. But TJ, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Got a fun FanDuel Friday ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to the weekend. It's wedding season coming up here. One of my best friends is getting married soon. I'm prepping my wedding is about 7 weeks, so always exciting when I get to escape real life and get into baseball mode.
Nice to get to travel for the wedding at all, or is it local?
All here, which I'm pretty
Okay.
happy about, to be honest. Ever since the
Yeah.
pandemic started, my mental health hasn't liked me leaving my home base too often.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm heading to my wife was a surrogate, and the child she gave birth to is turning 1 tomorrow. So we got a birthday party to go to. We
Very
still are
cool.
friendly with the new parents, so that'll be interesting. Our kids have yet to interact with the 1-year-old, so it'll be interesting to see how that
That'll
all
be
works
very
out.
cool. How old are
Yeah.
your kids?
Oldest is 10, and then it goes 2 years every 2 years down to 4. So I got 4 kids.
Nice. Very
Yep.
nice.
Yep. Okay, but yeah, and we were talking. TJ and I were talking pre-show about how I let them watch Doctor Strange, the new Doctor Strange movie last night. It's probably not quite age appropriate, but no one report me for that one.
What
But yeah,
I what I will say is, of any Marvel movie ever, it has definitely the most graphic and cool deaths, and that's any of them
yeah,
have.
yeah. I wasn't paying too much attention, but when I would look over, I would see something, one of those cool deaths, and be like,
Yeah.
but then I would look at them and they'd be kind of okay with it. And so it's like, all right, no nightmares, so we're good to go. Um, I was gonna try to use nightmares into a transition of tonight's pitching slate, but it's really not that bad. I did some projected ownership before we came onto the show. I will say it's interesting, and I want to get your take on this immediately. Like anything I look at wants to pop Jeffrey Springs as like the guy tonight and the chalk pitcher tonight. And that is, I don't want to say scary because like he's facing the Pirates, so it's whatever. But on a 14 game slate, that stands out as interesting to me, I'll say. So give me a little bit your take on Jeffrey Springs, and then besides Springs, some of the other high end options that we can look at today.
Yeah, so that's the first thing that stood out to me as well is on a 14 game slate, I don't think there is a single pitcher that stands far and away above anyone else. But we have Nola and Springs doing that in projected ownership today. So my first thought is to go away from those guys. Now, I say this often, and I like to kind of elaborate when I do because it often gets confused. It is very known and common that pitching is more predictive than hitting. It is always better in a vacuum to pivot off of the chalk bats as opposed to pivoting off of the chalk pitchers. It's far more predictive to pitching. However, we often see ownership condense on pitching a lot more because of that fact, where it's not necessarily pivoting off the chalk because when it's on a 14 game slate like this, Jeffrey Springs and Aaron Nola are the top two options, but they probably each have a 5 to 10% chance of being the top pitcher on the slate. It's a really big slate. They don't deserve 20+% ownership each. And so because of that, those are two guys that I'm going to be looking to get away from a little bit. If it was the case where they were far and away the top two options and they're picking up the ownership, then yeah, I'll eat the chalk. I don't care. But when we have tons of options like this and the projection difference is going to be 1 or 2 points, but the ownership difference is going to be 15%, then that's where I'm going to be looking to pivot.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement there. I think, I mean, you kind of basically said why Springs is projecting is decent ownership. It's because it's a slate where no one stands out, and he projects well at 8,300. So he provides a nice discount from Aaron Nola. It's just tough for me to like. I mean, again, you said it already. It's tough for me to kind of eat that chalk on such a big slate because we do have some other options with decent upside. Maybe not the most ideal matchups. And I wouldn't be surprised if the projected ownership does condense throughout the day. Again, this is pretty early on a Friday morning, so I wouldn't be surprised if some of these guys came down, Springs and Nola, and we saw some of these other guys creep up. One of the guys that's not popping initially that I could see creep up in ownership is Alek Manoah. Very good pitcher, obviously, going against a Brewers team that does strike out. I think he'll probably climb a little bit. Kopech is the other guy. He's been kind of hard to figure out this season. It's been a bit of a roller coaster. Left 2 starts ago with an injury, came back. I think he was around 75 pitches last start, but he's another guy with decent upside. And then Andre Palante was the cheap guy that I was thinking. Like, I typically don't go this cheap on FanDuel at pitcher, but he kind of stands out like as an okay option. Relief pitcher converted into a starting pitcher now. He's probably going to be around that 80 pitch mark. Like, I wouldn't expect him to go 100 pitches or anything like that, but he's only 6K in a decent matchup against the Cubs. So those are some of the guys I'm looking at. Talk to me about if you have any takes on any of those guys, or if you have anybody else you want to throw into the mix here.
Yeah, so Manoah and Kopech are actually my 2 favorite tournament options kind of on first look early in the day here. To me, like, I view somebody like Nola compared to Manoah. Noah's going to be 4 times his own today, but I'd say like 55% to 45% is the chance that for Nola. Like, if you had odds, which one is going to be the higher scorer? Nola would be like minus 130. Like, this wouldn't be, it's not like he's minus 300. You know what I mean? And so because of that, I just love that straight pivot to Manoah. I think there's a very good chance he could end up being the highest scoring pitcher of the 2. I was telling people, bet this man for Cy Young when he was still like 25-1, 30-1 in the AL East. I'm big Alek Manoah fan. The other guys that I'm looking at on top of Michael Kopech as well, the reason I like him on a big slate is strikeout upside. I'm not looking at somebody like Julio Urias, who isn't a big strikeout guy, even though he's got a good strikeout matchup, not a big strikeout guy and just hoping he gets there. I'm looking for somebody who, even if they only get 5 or 6 innings, hopefully they get more, but even if they only get 5 or 6, they could strike out double-digit guys in that time. Michael Kopech is one of those guys. The cheap pivot I kind of like off of what's his name there, Jeffrey Springs. I think we're going to see some people maybe go to German Marquez, maybe go to Cobb. The guy I like is Dane Dunning. This is a young, talented pitcher. Lefties do get to him a little bit, but there's still some strikeouts in this Washington lineup, and I'm a big Dane Dunning guy. So that's the cheapie I think I might take a shot on, but I'll probably be sticking in this upper tier today.
Yeah, and you mentioned with Dane Dunning, the lefty. So, like, when we have guys like that, it's important to see what sort of lineups released, right? Maybe Soto, gets the day off. He was kind of struggling through injury there for a little bit. Maybe he randomly gets the night off. And if things like that happen, it can boost a pitcher, not a significant amount, but perhaps enough to put him in your player pool. So that's just an important reminder to, unfortunately,
Soto's a very significant one too, just because like if he's not hitting for power, there's a good chance he's probably taking a walk. So he's a tough one on pitchers, especially a pitcher who struggles to lefties. So that would be a big one. And I actually, there's no report saying Soto's going to sit, but weirdly enough, I kind of had a similar thought of like, I could see this being a day he takes a day off.
Yeah, and it's more just a reminder, like, if you're watching this early in the day, unfortunately, baseball is not a set it and forget it sport. You got to make sure your guys are in the lineup. And perhaps the underrated part is lineups matter for opposing pitchers, maybe not looked into quite as much. So yeah, that matters. You mentioned Alex Cobb briefly. I'm going to go here real quick to the MLB weather report, thanks to Kevin Roth. Something I noticed pretty quickly when taking a look over the weather report, and I do this typically pretty early on in my process throughout the day, just to make sure I'm not wasting time, more or less, on a game that's going to get rained out.
Me too. It's the first thing I do every day.
Yeah, and I look at Weather Edge too. And again, it's important to remember Weather Edge is not predictive. This is all descriptive data based on similar conditions. So we're not necessarily saying some of this stuff is What's going to happen tonight. Every game's a little bit different. But I think what I noticed most, or scrolling through this, is, again, hot pretty much everywhere, except once we make it out to the West Coast and we're in San Francisco and we're looking at 58 degrees. That stadium they have is designed to kind of filter out that wind, so blowing out does not bother me at all. So Alex Cobb made a start last. His last start was only 60 pitches. It was his first start back off the IL. If he gets up to that 80 pitch mark, I think he's kind of an okay option. But even Graham Ashcroft, again, not somebody like I'm overly excited to play, but I think the environment, once you compare it to everywhere else in the league on a night like tonight, is actually very favorable for pitchers. So I do think it's okay to take stabs on guys in that game as well.
That's definitely a good call. I think that's interesting. Like, Cobb worries me just with the pitch count still. Like, right. If he gets 85 pitches, I actually don't know that that's going to be enough to win on a 14-game slate. Just kind of as we speak here, I'm kind of looking into Ashcraft here.
Honestly, and I don't know a ton about Ashcraft's pedigree.
Wow.
I surfed the game logs a little bit. That does not sound like good pedigree. Or
the game log got me excited for the 2 games he had in the 40s at the potential. And then I just looked. He's got a 13.5% strikeout rate.
Yeah, and obviously we chase strikeouts in MLB DFS. So if he's not striking people out, and it's not a great matchup for that either. Although the Giants did throw out a really watered down lineup last night. I think Brandon
Crawford did, and that was they had no Crawford, no Belt. There was a ton of right-handed bats, and so I loved Kyle Wright, and it didn't really work out because he just didn't have it.
Yeah,
he couldn't throw the ball in the zone, and it happens. But I think those are gonna be tough to go to. It's like, obviously this is a FanDuel show, so we're not going to dive into it. But if he is super cheap on another site, that could potentially be worth looking into. But for the most part, I think there are a few different cheap pitchers you can take some shots on. But I think the most value is actually in the upper tier today. Like these 10K guys, I think the Nolas, the Luis Severinos, Justin Verlanders, these are the guys to me that probably have the best shot at putting up like a 50 spot. And I think that's what you're going to need on a 14-game slate. Jeffrey Springs is a good play, but the ownership is just, it's there. It's too high. So it's something we're going to want to pivot off of, but it's definitely interesting in optimals. For tournaments, somebody that actually is interesting as well that we didn't touch on is Mackenzie Gore. He's 8K on FanDuel. That is very cheap. He's coming off 2 very poor games in a row, which I think is going to keep people off of him. But that also, one of them was in Coors and the other one was still against Colorado. And Colorado they don't really strike out against left-handed batters. They do a good job against them. Today, he's going to face the Phillies. Phillies obviously have a ton of power, but they also strike out a lot. If he can get through Castellanos, Harper, and Hoskins, that little 3-man there, he's got a real good, they're not that tough of a lineup outside of that, and they got some high strikeout rates. So Mackenzie Gore is somebody that I like. He is reverse splits when it comes to strikeouts. He strikes out 28% of right-handed batters, and the only lefties he's going to be facing are Harper and Schwarber. So Mackenzie Gore is actually somebody that I find quite interesting as well. If I make 3 lineups today, he'll probably be in one of them.
Yeah, I like that call. I brought up Plate IQ here at Rotogrinders. Takes a look at the projected lineup, how they've gone, how they've looked the past 2 seasons I have selected here against left-handed pitching. You see the projected lineup collectively has a 24.1% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching over the last 2 seasons, which is, relatively high. Probably would be one of the higher ones on the slate if we went through that. Last guy I'll throw in the mix, Dylan Bundy, got his pitch count up last start. They've kind of been shorter on him a little bit. You mentioned Rockies don't strike out an absolute ton against left-handed pitching. Bundy's right-handed. They're still middle of the pack there, about 20.3% the last 2 seasons. Not a ton of power, though, really. some weak spots in that lineup as well. So Bundy would be the other cheap option I would look to. Real quick before we head to the hitting side and some of the stacks, you briefly mentioned it, and I kind of want your take just from like a strategy perspective. You kind of mentioned in passing the difference or the sacrifice if you're saving money at the pitching position. Can you just talk to me a little bit about opportunity cost, on a one starting pitching site like FanDuel compared to how you would approach it on another site that has multi-pitching?
Yeah, so when a site has multi-pitching, I don't mind getting a cheap guy in there just for the sake of filling up my lineups, because I can still have my one ace pitcher in there who can put up a really good score. And you're less worried about the one score you're getting because it's more about the combined score you get out of your two pitchers. On a one pitcher site like FanDuel, I only like paying down at pitcher if there's a real cheap guy who, one, can either get a complete game, or two, has really high strikeout upside. The reason for that is with only one guy at that position, even if he has a cheap guy has a good point per dollar game. So let's use Palante today for an example. Even if if we're expecting him to get around 80 pitches and he is a good point per dollar pitcher, we have him projected to be the third best point per dollar pitcher on the slate. But that's also projected with 22 points. Yeah. So say he exceeds that. He has a good game. He exceeds our projection, even higher point per dollar pitcher, and he puts up 27. And maybe that ends up making him the highest point per dollar pitcher on the slate. Let's use 28 because then it's just a little bit easier. But if that's 4.5 or 3.5. Math is hard in the morning.
4.5.
4.5x. Yeah. So if we give 4.4x, just 4x to Austin Nola, for example, well, that's over 40 points. You better get your stack perfectly if you're getting 13 less points out of your pitcher, because with a 14 game slate, there's nothing saying that an expensive stack is going to do better than a cheap stack. Like, we know that that's not very predictive, right? We know it's baseball. Any team can put up 10 runs on any given night. Any other team can go 0 for 4 with all their batters on any given night. So you got to get your stack perfect if you're getting 13 to 15 less points out of your pitcher. You may as well just take that extra 15 points from your pitcher, even though it's not as good point per dollar, and you just fill it in with the cheap stacks where it's less predictive.
Yeah, agreement there. And raw, long story short, raw points much more important on a single pitching site like FanDuel is. So we're looking for guys that do have some upside. Like you said, you really have to nail the stacks.
And the one you mentioned, I think, is a good call with that pitch count going up is Dylan Bundy, because yes, his floor is low, but it's a tournament. I don't care if he gives up a few runs. He's not going to be my guy anyways. That's not going to be the team that does well. But he pitched 8 innings last game, and like you said, Colorado will strike out against right-handed bats a little bit. If he goes 7 innings with 8 strikeouts at his price, that is a slate winning score. If you can get a cheap pitcher who can put up not a 3x, a 4x score, but a 7x, 8x score, that's when we're really cooking, and that's when you're able to take down a tournament. So if you're paying down, you can't look for a guy that's just like, I hope he gets me 5 innings and I hope he gets me 5x. That will not do it on a 14-game slate. Maybe it'll do it on 3 or 4 when all you need is 1 or 2 expensive guys to fail. It's not going to do it on a big slate. So if you are going to go down cheap, you got to not worry about the potential downside and worry about and focus on the guys who can either strike out a ton or who can go very deep in a game.
Yep. Total agreement there. Let's move on to those stacks then. I ran real quick before we came on 300 lineups at 4x stacks just to see what we would get for kind of some of the chalk stacks, or at least the stacks that project well. So let's see what pops. It looks like we're getting a decent amount of Minnesota. Yeah, Minnesota is kind of showing up. Texas, that one's a little bit surprising to me. The Rangers are showing up. Dodgers unsurprising. Talk to me a little bit about your top stacks on the slate. It can be chalky to start, and then we can go a little bit more, maybe more under the radar as we continue.
So it always makes me feel good when one of two things happens. I look at the slates and I have an idea of what I think is going to happen, and then I look at projections and projective ownership, and that's the case. Or when I look at Cheese's article and he thinks the same thing that I thought. That is always just like a really, really good positive thing in my book. And that was kind of the three teams I was looking at that I thought were a little bit overowned were Minnesota, the Angels, as well as Texas. And so I think all those are they're all in good spots, but it's a 15 or a 14 game slate. I don't think they're in that great of more great of spots than anybody else. So I like the Dodgers. They're picking up some ownership, but I think they're my top stack on the board. I've noticed this year that like anytime like the Dodgers home road splits this year are pretty huge. Okay. Like they're always like decently big because it's they have a pretty good pitcher's park, but it doesn't matter that much because their lineup is so big. It's mattered this year. They've like pretty consistently crushed on the road and pretty consistently disappointed at home. And we have some potential weather in this game. There's pop-ups. If there are some delays that knock out some starting pitchers, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing as long as we can avoid postpones here. Hopefully Roth has a little bit better of an idea close, but with pop-ups, you never know for sure. I like the Dodgers a lot. The Dodgers are my top offense on the board as long as this one plays. Hopefully the weather scares people off a little bit. The wind is shooting back, but it's a small wind. It's really hot. The dew point's high. That ball's gonna, like, as you can see, that's a 4-game sample size there. People didn't hit home runs, but there was a lot of runs. It's still hot and really good hitting weather. So the Dodgers are my top offense on the board. I for tournaments, I also like quite a bit St. Louis. I like Toronto. I like the White Sox and Boston. Those would be my top teams. The one I have projecting pretty well for if I'm wanting to be paying up at pitching and I need to get a cheap value stack in there, the one that's looking the best for me on paper, which terrifies me, is Oakland. I don't want to play Oakland, but it's old man Zach Greinke. He's not what he was. I have a friend who is good friends with his wife. And so shout out Zach Greinke and my friend Janelle because that's cool. But I still am tempted to stack against him today. So if I need a very cheap team to mix in with some expensive Dodgers or the top price guys on Boston, Toronto, something like that, then I might look into Oakland, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
Although on FanDuel, we're looking at, you just pulled up a team right here that is quite cheap as well, and facing a pitcher who sometimes is pretty darn good and sometimes is pretty darn awful. So
yeah, I was curious to see. I mean, that's the game that stood out to me, Oakland, Kansas City, as teams you don't really want to stack. But there's going to be a lot of balls in play. Irvin and Greinke don't strike anybody out. I think the biggest issue with both these teams, but probably more so Oakland, is we're looking for power, right? So maybe not get crazy with the full out stacks here, but Seth Brown, Stephen Vogt. I don't know if Vogt still has power, but he did at one time in his career.
Get Laureano in there. The tough part with KC is like one of the guys I'd love to play today. He'd be one of my favorite tournament plays on the slate if he was in, would be Sal Perez.
Right.
But he's obviously dealing with that thumb injury. So I still like Bobby Witt Jr. a lot, and even the potential for like a Whit Merrifield, Bobby Witt Jr. mini stack. You can throw Dozier. Like if Dozier's batting 4th, not 6th, then all of a sudden I have a lot more interest in like a 3-man. But yeah, I agree. Those would be the cheapies I'm gonna look to if I need to fill out some lineups.
Yeah, I agree. Let's look real quick. I have the bat stack projections pulled up. Curious what they say, point per dollar stacks. They have the Oakland as second behind the Diamondbacks against Ronny Garcia. I will say it's like the bat loves Dalton Varsho, and so that's probably half the reason right there. And I think Varsha is really cheap. He's 2,500. But actually their whole team is under 3K, not a single bat over 3K. So that actually checks out. That makes a lot of sense to me. Alec Thomas has some pretty decent power. Josh Rojas has a 3 home run game this year. So yeah, I actually I do like the Diamondbacks a decent amount is another potential value stack.
I'm condensing my pitching pool here as we speak, and there is somebody that I forgot to mention that I don't mind, and that's Merrill Kelly.
Yeah, he's a tough one for me, depending on where the ownership lies for him.
I don't want to play him because he's Merrill Kelly, but he's got a very high pitch count. He's not very expensive, and he's playing Detroit.
Yeah, which is all you need on a slate like this. So I get it. I have so much trouble looking at this.
I was looking to condense the reason I got back here is I was condensing my pitching pool for just I don't think I'm gonna multi-enter today. I got a lot going on, so I don't think I'll have time. But I like to always cut my pitching pool to what it would be for if I was, just to kind of look at it. And on a 15-game slate on FanDuel, 14-game slate on FanDuel, I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pitchers. 12 pitchers. In there is included Herman Marquez, Alex Cobb, Dane Dunning, Luis Severino, who I would all be getting very small amounts of. We're talking 5% or less. But I think my biggest targets would be Mackenzie Gore, Michael Kopech, Alek Manoah, Tier 2, Justin Verlander, Nola, Springs, and Kelly, and then Tier 3, those cheaper guys.
And honestly, that should tell you what we've talked about numerous times today in the set is that if anybody pops his chalk, that's probably bad. And You probably want to be underweight on that. It's a slate where we have a handful of pitchers that would not be surprising if they ended up being optimal.
100%. Aaron Nola and Jeffrey Springs are the top 2 pitching options on the slate. They do not deserve the ownership that goes with them on a 14-game slate in tournaments.
Full agreement there. Yeah, I mean, I think we're good. I think we talked about stacks. If there's anything else hitting-wise you want to talk about, we can do that. Otherwise, we can just, I think, get on out here.
Yeah, so the top pitchers on the slate the top hitters on the slate are picking up the ownership they deserve. Mike Trout, Rafael Devers, Jose Ramirez. They are all phenomenal plays. Just know that they're getting too much ownership than they should be for a slate this big. The guys that I think that I were projecting early that are picking up a lot, I don't really agree with. Luis Ariz, I'd be comfortable getting off that chalk. Marcus Semien, guys like that, I'd be totally good getting off of. It's a big slate. Don't be afraid to get different.
Yep, in agreement there. But yeah, that's gonna do it then. I don't have any fire takes to bring on. I agree with pretty much the stack takes you brought on. So that's gonna do it here for FanDuel Friday. As always, feel free to reach out to us if you guys have any questions on the slate. You can reach us on Twitter or any suggestions you have for future shows. Feel free to shoot that our way as well. But that's gonna do it. Good luck tonight.